Here's part one in Taco style, following your instructions. I kept it grounded, male POV, quietly emotional, and built toward a reflective cliffhanger. I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The first time it happened, I was fumbling with the keys at the corner apartment building, the one with the narrow stairwell that smelled faintly of old carpet and baking bread. She appeared on the landing above me, carrying a grocery bag that looked way too heavy for her. "You're Jake, right?" she asked, half smiling. Her voice didn't make a big deal out of it. It was just her noticing me, like she'd paused mid-step to check the color of my shirt or the way I was balancing my backpack. "Yeah," I said. My voice caught a little, and I had to clear my throat. She tilted her head and shifted the bag from one hand to the other. "Thought so. You live in 3B. "Yeah." I paused, wondering if I should say more. But she didn't wait for an answer. She just went on down the stairs. That was the first small shock. She knew me, or at least she remembered me. And later I realized how rare that was. Since then, seeing her became part of the rhythm I didn't tell anyone about. Mondays, she appeared at the lobby mailbox, sorting letters with her fingernails, tracing the edges like she was smoothing out some invisible wrinkle. Thursdays, she passed the stairwell with her arms full of groceries, and we'd exchange a few words. Always casual, never forced. And yet I noticed the tiny things. The way she frowned at the fluorescent light in the hallway. How she adjusted the strap of her tote bag without looking. Once when I spilled a bit of coffee on the stair landing, she leaned down and wiped it with the hem of her sleeve. I remember thinking she didn't have to, but she did anyway. I was always on my guard. I didn't know why I cared so much that she remembered my coffee order, black, 2 sugars, or that she sometimes left a small, almost invisible note on the bulletin board for me about the rent. I never replied. I never mentioned it. But I noticed, and it was enough. I had a habit of stopping by the lobby when I had nothing to do, pretending I needed the mailbox while actually watching her from a distance. I counted the seconds she spent arranging envelopes, the soft flick of her eyes when someone else waved at her. And maybe, I admit, I liked that she noticed me in return, even in these almost invisible ways. I never sent the texts I typed to her. I never called. I didn't know what I'd say, and I knew the silence suited me better anyway. Sometimes I'd sit on the bottom step after she left, folding my hands around my knees, watching the sunlight hit the old wooden rail, wondering if she felt as aware of me as I was of her. And then it happened, this Thursday. The hallway was quiet, just the faint hum of the heater. She stepped off the stairs with her tote slung over her shoulder and paused. "Jake," she said. I looked up, and for a second she just looked at me, her eyes not moving, and it felt like she was weighing something too delicate to say out loud. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. My name was written on it in neat, slanting handwriting. "Can you keep this between us?" she asked softly. I nodded before I even read it, though the paper was already trembling slightly in my hands. And just like that, she was gone down the hall, leaving me with a quiet apartment lobby and the sudden, unshakable sense that something had just shifted, something I wasn't ready to name. I didn't open the envelope yet. I couldn't. But I folded the corners of the paper in my hand and felt the weight of it, like holding a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. White heavy checkmark microbehaviors included. Watching her adjust her tote bag, folding hands around knees on the stair, trembling envelope in hands, white heavy checkmark hook, quiet routine, attraction through micro moments, loneliness, reflective cliffhanger, all present. Here's part two in Kitako style, building on the story and slowly deepening their connection while keeping tension and subtle risk. I didn't open the envelope until that night, sitting cross-legged on the threadbare rug in my tiny apartment. The hallway light slanted across the floor, painting long shadows of my knees. Inside, there was only a note, brief, almost fragile. "Meet me for tea tomorrow. 3 p.m. Just us. And please don't tell anyone." I thought about it too long. I imagined every possible way this could go wrong. A friend noticing, a misread glance, the quiet judgment of a world that would see it as a line crossed. And yet, by the next afternoon, I found myself fumbling with the doorknob of her apartment, envelope still in my pocket. She answered almost immediately, wearing the same cardigan I'd noticed once when she leaned over the mailbox. It smelled faintly of jasmine and detergent, and for a second I felt something close to recognition or longing or both. "Come in," she said. The words were simple, but her eyes lingered on mine, and I felt the awkward heat of being seen. We sat at the tiny kitchen table, the kettle hissing beside us. She poured tea with careful hands, the kind of hands that knew exactly how much to tilt the pot, how to avoid spilling a drop. I watched, aware of every small motion, every fold of her fingers around the mug. "Divorce?" I asked almost too quietly. I shouldn't have, I knew, but I couldn't stop myself. She gave a faint smile, not amused, not sad, just acknowledging. "Yes, a while ago." Then she added, as though the words were slippery and might escape her, "It's easier to keep track of the building alone. Less complicated." The sentence hung between us. I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to trace the edges of her life, but I didn't. Silence settled like a third presence at the table. I sipped my tea, too aware of how warm it was, how warm she was. I tried imagining what it would be like to say something reckless, a joke that crossed the line, a compliment that felt too intimate. My stomach twisted at the thought, and I realized how much I wanted to test the boundary, and how much I was afraid to. She stirred her tea slowly, and our eyes met once, long enough for me to notice the tiny scar on her thumb, the slight crease where she always frowns when she thinks. I wanted to reach out, to brush it with a careless gesture that said, "I notice you." Instead, I cleared my throat, shifted in my chair, and let my hand brush hers, almost accidentally, when I picked up my cup. Her eyes flicked down and back up, and in that glance there was a recognition that went beyond words. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I thought later, after I'd left, walking down the narrow street with the envelope still in my pocket, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. White heavy checkmark key points included. Small personal revelation. She is divorced, risk hinted. Age gap, tenant landlady, child of friend dynamic implied, internal conflict. Imagined scenarios, hesitation, suppressed desire, emotional tension. Shared tea, sitting in silence. Tiny gestures, gesture with weight. Accidental brush of hands. Lingering gaze, reflective pivot line. Ties, the emotional impact. Staying true to Kyutako style. Here's part 3, following your instructions. Rising emotional stakes. Intimacy in small beats, subtle tension, near confession. I'd started leaving my shoes by the door without thinking, the sound of her keys in the lock pulling me out of whatever I was doing. That afternoon, the hallway smelled faintly of rain and laundry detergent, and she was crouched by the radiator, twisting the valve as if it were some delicate puzzle. "You've been fiddling with that a lot," I said, trying for casual, failing at casual. She didn't look at me at first, just kept turning the valve. "It gets stuck," she murmured, voice low, not really asking for help. I crouched next to her, and my fingers brushed hers while I tried to grip the valve. Too close, too warm. I pulled my hand back before she noticed. Or maybe she did, because she straightened and smiled softly, that small, knowing tilt of her lips that made me swallow hard. Something in me wanted to say the wrong thing. Say I like you, say I've been thinking about you. But my tongue wouldn't cooperate. I only said, "Better." "Better," she replied. And then she turned to check the thermostat, and I caught the angle of her wrist, the line of her neck, and felt the thrum in my chest I wasn't supposed to feel. I wanted to linger, wanted to stay on that stairwell, but the sound of her son's key turning in the lock made me flinch. A reminder, unspoken, of a line I couldn't cross. He opened the door and laughed about something, and suddenly the warmth between us contracted like it had no room to exist here. I stepped back, hands shoved in my pockets, pretending to be interested in the peeling paint. She glanced at me, a quick flick of her eyes that said this isn't the right time, or maybe it was you shouldn't be here. My stomach tightened. Later, I found myself in the kitchen again, cups lined up like small witnesses. We poured tea without speaking, but the silence wasn't empty. She hummed while stirring. I watched the curl of her hair fall against her shoulder, and my mind traced all the ways I shouldn't care this much. I almost reached out again, to touch her hand, to let her know I wanted more than tea and polite smiles. My fingers hovered, then froze just shy of the edge. She noticed. Her gaze softened for a second, long enough for me to think we might cross some line. And then she set the cup down, leaned back, and looked at the window. The rain tapped a quiet rhythm on the glass, and I thought, this is it, isn't it? I can't. But I can't leave either. Her voice finally came, low, measured. You should get going, before he notices. I nodded, shoulders tight, and left with the echo of what didn't happen pressing behind me. Outside, the rain blurred the streetlights into soft halos, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for the entire walk home. Almost. That's all it had been. Almost saying too much. Almost touching. Almost crossing the line that both of us knew existed. And yet I couldn't stop imagining the moment stretched out. Fingers brushing, lips so close, then vanishing like smoke slipping through my hands. White heavy checkmark key elements included. Pullback/resistance. She subtly keeps distance, mentions her son complication. Her son arrives, routine interrupted tension in small beats. Brushing hands, shared tasks, stolen glances near crossing. Hovering fingers, almost confession. Near kiss, internal monologue fragmented. Unfinished thoughts, silent body language conveys attraction and hesitation. Here's part 4. Building to the emotional peak while keeping it grounded and Kyutako. We ended up on the bench outside the building, late afternoon. The sky had that washed-out gray that made everything feel both empty and full at the same time. She had her bag on her lap, fingers drumming lightly against the strap. I was leaning forward, elbows on knees, staring at the cracked concrete like it held answers. You seem distracted lately, she said, voice soft but with an edge I couldn't place. I wanted to laugh, say it was nothing, but that would have been a lie. I kept noticing the way she talked to tenants, the way her attention shifted when someone else's voice broke the quiet, and a small, irrational flame of jealousy flickered in me. I didn't want her noticed by anyone else, not like she noticed me. I don't know, I said. My voice sounded too loud in the empty courtyard. I glanced at her, but she was looking down, twisting the corner of her scarf around her fingers. Jake, she murmured, almost a whisper. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't even. Her words trailed off. I tilted my head, and she met my eyes, raw and quiet, like someone holding a fragile truth on the tip of her tongue. I wanted to tell her everything in that moment, that I had thought about her every morning, that I noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, that her faint smile at the mailbox had stayed with me for weeks. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I reached out, just a slow, careful motion, brushing my fingers against the side of her hand, resting on the bag. Her eyes lifted instantly, and in that glance, there was a shiver of something we couldn't name. I don't know why I'm like this, I said finally. My words stumbled, almost too much, almost enough to shatter the quiet we had been holding. I shouldn't. She pressed her lips together, small, deliberate, and I could tell she was biting back something. Guilt. Want. I didn't know. The wind picked up, tossing loose leaves across the cracked walkway, and she adjusted her bag, tucked herself a little tighter. I wanted to reach for her again, to say it's okay, I understand, but my hand stayed hovering, half empty, half full, caught between restraint and impulse. Do you ever feel like maybe, she trailed off, and I leaned in slightly, trying to catch the rest of the sentence, the confession dangling like a promise I wasn't supposed to touch. We stayed like that for minutes, letting the silence answer questions neither of us dared speak. My chest thumped, my thoughts scattered, but all I could do was watch the small movements, the curl of her hair, the way she shifted her weight, the subtle tilt of her head toward me. And then she pulled her hand back just enough to leave me reaching, and asked, or maybe just thought, I couldn't tell, do you want this? The words hung between us, fragile as spun glass, and I realized I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Here's part 5, following your instructions. The twist, emotional whiplash, ambiguity, Kitako-style tension. I waited in the lobby that Thursday like I had the week before. Coffee in hand, keys jingling, rehearsing words I wasn't ready to say. She didn't come down. Not at the mailbox, not in the hallway, not anywhere I could see. I lingered for longer than I should have, ears straining for the faintest sound of her footsteps. Nothing. The next day, the note slipped under my door was smaller than usual, almost hesitant. Sorry. Can't today. Things came up. I stared at it, thumb tracing the familiar handwriting, try to decode what things meant. My chest tightened. Not exactly panic, not exactly sadness, just the odd sensation of a pause, as if the world had hit a key and then stopped mid-press. I kept imagining reasons. Maybe her son needed her. Maybe the thermostat was broken again. Maybe she realized she shouldn't be spending time like this with me. I tried to call, didn't. Texted once, erased it, typed another, erased that too. My phone lay face down on the table for hours. Each vibration I imagined was her, turning a corner, noticing me, and then realizing she hadn't. When she finally appeared 3 days later, she looked different. Tired in a new way, guarded, as if she had braced herself for something she hadn't said. She nodded at me, just a small flick, and went about her routine, groceries, letters, elevator dings. I tried to meet her eyes, tried to offer a smile that could mean I waited, or I understand, or I don't know what I'm doing. She didn't meet mine. We walked past each other in silence a few times that week. Her laughter was faintly clipped, her pauses longer. I caught glimpses of her from the staircase, flipping through bills, tracing the corner of a page with her finger, sighing into her palm. Each motion meant something, but I couldn't read it. I imagined scenarios in my head, the worst, the hopeful, the impossible. I pictured her leaning against the doorframe, telling me to forget it. I pictured her reaching for my hand. I pictured both at once, the collision of desire and restraint, and my stomach ached from holding the contradictions in place. I almost went upstairs one evening, knocked on her door, but stopped mid-step. The hallway stretched long and quiet, and I realized the worst part wasn't rejection. It was ambiguity. I sat on the bottom stair for a long time, letting the apartment hum around me. My thumbs hovered over my phone screen, the message unsent, the words trapped. The envelope from weeks ago still rested in my pocket, folded carefully, its weight suddenly heavier than before. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Here's part 6, the emotional climax, in quiet, grounded Kutako style. I found her in the kitchen that evening, the apartment empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of a spoon against a mug. She was standing at the counter, peeling an orange, her shoulders slightly hunched. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should step in or just leave the moment untouched. "Hey," I said finally, my voice too soft, too careful. She glanced up, startled for just a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Hey." Her words didn't fill the silence. They threaded through it. I wanted to say everything, the waiting, the notes, the almost touch, the pause that had stretched into days. I want to tell her I noticed her in all the small ways she didn't think anyone did. But the words lodged in my throat, heavy with all the consequences they might carry. She caught my hesitation. Her eyes softened, and she let out a quiet sigh. "Jake, I know you." She paused, just long enough for me to lean against the counter. "Notice things." I swallowed. The air felt thick. My hands itched to reach for her, to let the half-finished sentences finally become something. But the risk, the cost, was everywhere in that small kitchen. A wrong look, a misstep, a life upended. "I notice you," I said finally, the simplest words I could manage. Not a confession, not a plea. Just a truth, bare and careful. She set the orange slices down, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and looked at me. Not with accusation, not with expectation, but with acknowledgement. Her gaze held something fragile, understanding, and maybe something else I wasn't supposed to name. For a moment, we stood there, two quiet people in an ordinary kitchen, with everything we hadn't said hovering between us. And then she did something small, a half-smile, barely there but enough, and said, "Okay." That was it. Not a dramatic declaration, not a turning point, just a soft, human acknowledgement that we had crossed the line of silence and lived to see it. I nodded back, feeling the weight of the months we'd spent circling around each other, the quiet tension finally shared in the smallest, most ordinary way. The kettle whistled in the background, the fridge hummed, and the apartment smelled like orange and tea. I wanted more, but I didn't reach. I wanted her to speak, to close the gap, but I let the moment stay as it was quiet, fragile, true. And in that calm, I understood something, that noticing each other, even in fragments, had been enough. Here's part 7, the Kitako-style conclusion, tying all the threads together with gentle, earned closure. Months had passed. The building felt different somehow, less like a collection of strangers, more like a quiet rhythm we had learned to move within. I still left my shoes by the door, though less out of nervous anticipation and more from habit. The staircase smelled faintly of laundry detergent and sun-warmed wood, and I noticed the small cracks in the paint lining the steps like old friends. She had taken to leaving the kettle on the counter, even when she wasn't making tea. Black coffee had become our morning ritual, the way it always was for me. Bitter, unsweet, grounding. She never poured for me unless I asked, and I never asked unless I meant it. That was enough. One Thursday, she leaned against the doorway while I sipped my cup, her arms crossed casually. "The radiator's stuck again," she said, voice soft, almost teasing. "Want to help?" I nodded. Together, we crouched by the valve, hands brushing as usual. No words rushed between us, just familiarity, the quiet pulse of two lives intersecting in small, ordinary ways. I noticed the crease where her knuckle met her thumb, the way she tilted her head when she concentrated, the faint jasmine scent that lingered from her shampoo. Later, we sat on the bench outside the building, leaves scattered at our feet. She pulled her scarf tighter, I leaned back, and for a long time, we said nothing. Occasionally, her fingers brushed mine while reaching for a cup or adjusting her bag, each touch a reminder that we were still here, still noticing, still connected without any grand announcement. Her son waved from the door, and she smiled, a small, quiet thing that had nothing to do with me. And yet, in that glance, in the space between her smile and my nod, there was understanding. We belonged somewhere in the ordinary, and that was enough. I thought about the envelope I had held months ago, the words we never spoke, the pauses, the near confessions, and I realized it had all led to this. Not perfection, not dramatic closure, just presence, patience, and the shared knowledge that we had seen each other truly and stayed anyway. Evenings passed like this. Tea at 3, coffee at 8:47 a.m., quiet exchanges over the mail, folded hands, small glances, soft laughter spilling into the hallway. Each repetition, ordinary and unremarkable to anyone else, was a thread tying us together. And one morning, when she handed me the mug without a word and I caught the corner of her note on the counter, folded, worn at the edges, I smiled. Just a small, private acknowledgement. She caught it too, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, and that was all the conversation we needed. I didn't feel the need to name it. We had never needed to. The slow rhythm of our lives, the small, deliberate gestures, the silent understanding. This was enough. And as I watched her close the door behind her, scarf tucked and groceries balanced, I thought, softly, we notice each other. And that's enough.